welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to share my January reads. I read 10 books.
January, January, January books. So I am a book reads user, but I did pick up this book lovers journal from Target several weeks back. And the thing I really like about this book journal is that you can leave, whatever rating you want on the books. Goodreads, you can only leave full stars. You can't leave half or quarter. And in this book, you can leave why you chose the book, the dates you read it, your summary, your favorite quotes, highlights, book, author, genre, and then there's the area where you can just mark your quick opinion of the book. One of the best books I've read, pure entertainment, guilty pleasure read, not what I expected, it was just okay, emotional, historically funny, worst book ever, and why you chose the book. So I really like this because I'm trying to keep track of the type of book I'm reading or the format of the book. So if it's a library book, I'm marking that down. If it is an audiobook, I'm marking that down, or an audiobook from the library, from my own personal library, if I'm borrowing it from a friend. And then at the end of the year, I can just kind of tally up the format or the way I am consuming my books so I can keep a personal record. My first book of the year, I started out on a depressing note and I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. It was first published in 1963 and it is a classic literary fiction genre. I gave it 4.5 stars, and this was a book from my personal library. Now, this book is emotional and there is a trigger warning because the main character does suffer from self-harm and suicide attempts, suicide ideation. With that being said, this was a reread. I read it in college and maybe like 10 years ago. And the first time I read it, I was in college and I felt like I could relate a lot to the main character, Esther. So the story is about Esther Greenwood. She's a college girl that is in New York City on an internship. She and a bunch of other girls won awards and now they get to write and work with columnists. They are going to fancy dinners and like living in a dorm together, and she's kind of realizing she's a lot different from the other girls. The other girls care about like boys and getting married and all that, and she's just kind of struggling finding her place in the world. She is slowly losing her grip on reality, and she brings you as the reader down with you. She leaves New York, she goes home, she's staying with her mom, and she suddenly can't sleep, she can't eat, she can't write. She's kind of struggling if she should go back to school in the fall, if she should learn shorthand from her mom and just work in an office. She, as the weeks go by, she's just deteriorating. She does attempt suicide. She ends up in a mental hospital, and then you kind of follow her journey there with the different therapists. She goes through like the electroshock therapy, meeting other girls, and then just trying to like move forward and move back into the world. Some of my favorite quotes are, if you expect nothing from someone, you are never disappointed. So Esther in the book, there's a boy she liked or she thought she would like. She finds out some history from him, about him, from him, and she just kind of feels like she was duped, and she feels like the whole world is duped, and kind of like, what's the point? So she's kind of like, if you just don't expect anyone, then you won't be bummed out, which is sad but true. Another quote, so it's called The Bell Jar. This quote's kind of like about the title of the book. Because wherever I sat on a deck of a ship or a street cafe in Paris or Bangkok, I would be sitting under the same glass bell jar, stewing in my own sour air, which is kind of like wherever you go, there you are. Like you can't buy your own happiness. You can't escape yourself. You're kind of stuck with who you are. I do highly recommend the book, but definitely only if it is something you can handle with the trigger warning of self-harm and suicide. But it is a good book. The next book I read is called Haunted Sister, and the author is Lael Littke, and it was published in 1998. The genre is young adult fiction, like ghostish mystery, and I gave it 3.5 stars. This was a library book, and my quick opinion of the book is that it was surprising. I stumbled upon this book while reviewing another book, or the title popped up somewhere and I thought it sounded good. I did read it all in one day. I started it January 2nd and I finished it January 2nd. And the book is about Janie. She's a 16-year-old girl, and she is in a car accident with her boyfriend and has a near-death experience. And when she's revived, she is found suffering from a brain injury and develops a split personality. Only the second personality is her twin sister that died in childhood. So it's like her and her dead twin in one body, and like her family just thinks she's has a concussion or a brain injury, and she's like, no, there's something else going on. And then you kind of follow her story navigating her new life now that she woke up with these two personalities inside her mind. It was good. It was really good. It was a quick read. It's young adult, so it's pretty easy. It's fast moving story, and it's a bit of a psychological thriller, not a scary ghost story, but still haunting. Book by Katie Holt, and it was published in 2024, so it's a pretty new book. It's contemporary romance with some spice. I gave it 4 stars. I read it on my Kindle through the Libby app at the library, and I would classify it as a guilty pleasure read. I chose it because it was available instantly through my Libby app, and I just needed something quick to pick up, and it was there. I started it on January 2nd, and I finished it January 7th. And the story is about Rosie, and Rosie is a grad student in New York City. She's studying to be a writer. So her genre she likes to write is romance. And there's a guy in her class who only writes literary fiction. And they kind of butt heads and argue a lot in class, and they end up in trouble, and they're almost kicked out of the program. But instead, their teacher convinces them to write their book together, and you can probably guess the rest. It was one of the better contemporary romance books that I've read. The characters aren't terrible, and there isn't a huge amount of annoying drama, but it is a slow burn, and there are open door scenes, so if that's not your thing, you might want to skip it. But they do help progress the story, and I thought it was cute. There was a good amount of the story that took place over Christmas time in New York City, and that felt really magical, and I read this right after Christmas, so I really, really liked that. And it is an enemies to lovers trope. I read Perfect Little Children by Sophie Hannah, and this one was written and published in 2020. And I read the physical book from the library, but I also would switch and listen to the audio when I was like cooking and cleaning. It was not what I expected, but I did love the story idea, and I saw it on social media, so that's why I added it to my TBR list. I read it from January 7th to the 11th, and the story is about Beth. Beth drives past an old friend's home, and she sees her friend and 2 of her kids come out of their car, but the kids are the exact same age they were 12 years ago. They haven't aged, so the last time Beth saw them, they were toddlers, and when she saw them again, these 12 years later, they are still toddlers. And she's trying to figure out the mystery of how the children haven't aged the mom has aged, but the kids haven't, and she's just kind of wondering, like, what the F is going on. I enjoyed the book. It takes place in England, or there's like an English setting, and I really liked the idea of the book, and I wasn't quite sure how it would end. I was thinking there would be like a sci-fi kind of twist to it, but there wasn't. I don't know if that's a spoiler, but I overall enjoyed the book. The pace seemed kind of slow for me as a thriller, but I did give it 3 stars, and it was a very interesting, different kind of book. So I would recommend it if you are into that kind of thing. Next, I read All the Lies by Nicola Sanders. This was an audiobook that I listened to while I was crocheting on my blanket, and it is a mystery psychological thriller that was published in 2020, and it was just pure entertainment. I read it in 2 days after seeing it on a friend's Goodread profile, and it's about Amy, the main character. She's trapped in an abusive marriage and she needs to free herself. And on her way to a short bout of time to herself, she is injured in a boat accident, and when she wakes up in the hospital, her identity has been mistaken for someone else who was on the boat, and now is kind of her chance to escape her abusive husband forever and become somebody else. It's kind of like if the story was written in a different point of view, you would think she's a villain because she's kind of stole this other victim's identity, and she's kind of tricking other people on who she is, and she's kind of a suspicious character if you weren't rooting for her. I really liked it. I listened to it pretty fast, and my husband was kind of listening to it as I was crocheting, and he was kind of invested in it too, I think. It's very fast paced. I really like the story and how uncomfortable I felt as the reader, just because the web of lies and the misunfortunate events, just knowing it couldn't end well, but it was really good. It was good kind of voting for the villain, even though she's not the villain. Obviously, the abusive husband is the villain, but it was really good, and I would definitely recommend. I gave it 4 stars, but now that time sits, I almost think it would be 4.5. The next book I read was Unmissing by Minka Kent, and it was a thriller. This was a physical library book that I read. I would classify it as guilty pleasure, pure entertainment, and it was recommended by a friend. So it is about a missing declared woman, and she shows up at her husband's home after 10 years, and she wants help getting back on her feet. Her husband has since remarried, and he has 2 kids, and he's been living kind of a lavish life. He's kind of like he owns a bunch of restaurants, and he lives in this big house by the ocean. He has this fancy wife, and you're kind of left wondering, like, is this lady really who she says she is? Did the story go how she says it goes? It's good. It was really good. I wasn't quite exactly sure how this one would turn out. There were some twists in there. Some were predictable, some weren't. I loved the short chapters with alternative point of view. So it switches between the missing wife and then the current wife. I will definitely read more by the author. I have read more by the author already, but I will definitely keep adding her books to my list. 13 Minutes by Sarah Pinborough, and this is a young adult thriller mystery, the library book. I gave this one 2.25 stars. This is the book that I was reading in my last video, and I would say it was just okay. I found it in my library, and I'm a sucker for near-death experience books. So the main character, Natasha, is pulled from a freezing river one January morning, and she's brought back to life after being dead for 13 minutes. And her friends are acting suspicious, and she isn't sure who she can trust or what exactly happened. And this takes place in the UK. There's twists and turns. They're high school girls. It kind of reminded me of like another book or a Lifetime movie, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. There's twists and turns. I wanted to love the story more, but it was kind of dragged out a little too long. There was a lot of repeating. It's young adult, but there was a lot of like drug use and smoking, drinking, sexual language, kind of inappropriate relations. And I'm pushing 37 and probably just too old for the like teen girl, mean girl drama, but it wasn't bad. It was the twist at the end or towards the end was kind of interesting. It kept me going. I definitely didn't want to throw it away. I definitely wanted to keep reading to figure out what was happening. Imaginary Strangers. I read another Minka Kent book. This was a library book in book format, a thriller. I gave it 4 stars. I would say it was a guilty pleasure. At this point, thrillers are just a guilty pleasure for me. It was recommended by a friend, and I read it in, I think, 4 days. So, Camille is the main character, and she is living a privileged life in California with her doctor husband and their 2 young children. And along the story, we get a glimpse of Camille's childhood and kind of her dark past. She was abused as a child, and things kind of take a turn when Camille's kindergarten daughter befriends someone at school who feeds her information about her mom's dark past. So her daughter comes home and she's saying things like things that Camille experienced as a child. Like, for example, her mom made her eat a meat jelly sandwich, which was just raw hamburger on a piece of bread, and the little girl is talking about it, and the mom's like, who would know this except for my mom? And so you're kind of, Camille doesn't trust the school, her husband doesn't trust her. There's kind of like a whole what's going on situation. It's a good thriller. It keeps you guessing the whole time. It's the main character's interesting because she has this traumatic childhood and she has a mental health disorder. She's a sociopath, so she doesn't feel like emotions really, even though she is worried. It's really good. It's a different point of view, and there's good twists that caught me off guard. It's a unique for a thriller, and I'm really impressed with the author's writing so far. I really like her. And then going right into another Minka Kent book, this Stillwater Girls. This was a library book and another thriller. And spoiler alert, I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. Pure entertainment, guilty pleasure read. It was recommended by a friend and I read it in 2 days. So there are 2 teenage girls who've been living in a cabin off grid their whole lives with their mother, and they face an unexpected challenge when their mom leaves with their ill sister. She's going to take her to the hospital, but she doesn't return for several months. So the girls are kind of running out of food. It's cold, it's wintertime. And then one night, a knock comes from their door, and there's a large man, and he invades their space. He comes right in, he eats their food, he kills their goat. They don't trust him. And so they escape, and then there's a second point of view character, and then she turns out to be the lady who helps the girls. The girls escape their cabin, they go to her house, she welcomes them into her home, and then she's also dealing with her own problems and her own crumbling marriage while also trying to help these girls and kind of figure out who they are, where they came from. And I like this author. I really, really enjoy her books. I knew there would be some type of mystery or twist with it, but I didn't see it coming, and it was a quick read. It was 250 pages long with alternative point of view and short chapters, which I just feel like is just perfect. I love that. I read Carrie by Stephen King, and this is a book from my own library. I just picked it up at the thrift store. It's been on my TBR for years. It is a horror, I think is the technical genre of it, though it's not very scary, and I gave it 2.5 stars. I would say it was just okay. I read it in one day, so obviously it wasn't terrible, but I'm not, I know this is maybe Stephen King's first or one of his first books, so maybe part of it is that I haven't read any of his other books, so maybe it is just kind of his writing style, but I wasn't super impressed. So Carrie is a teenage girl, and she's the butt of everyone's jokes. She's every bully's favorite victim. She lives alone with her mom, who's ultra religious and abusive, and Carrie finds that she can move and control objects with her mind, especially when she's upset. And the story jumps between narration, between like newspaper interviews, telekinesis reports, etc. So everything is in reference to this event that happens at the end of the book. And honestly, a book called Carrie, but as a reader, I didn't really feel like I got to know her as a character, but instead it was kind of like how everyone else felt about her, their own perceptions of her, which I would have liked to hear the book from her point of view, I guess. So while I didn't love the book, I actually read it all in one day, and I've seen bits of the movie here and there, and I was very familiar with the story. Like, I knew the ending, as probably most of you know. I didn't like the writing style, and it took me about half the book to get used to the format, because there's no chapters. There's random excerpts from articles. The like thoughts were like, I don't know, like whenever it would be like in parentheses, it would be like, I don't know, and then I was always lowercase, so I wasn't quite sure like what that meant. It was just a different format. And I'm not a huge fan of grown men writing about teenage girls. Like, and Carrie has a lot of, it starts with a like period and body talk, and it just kind of like is kind of an icky feeling. And my copy was from the early 90s, and it will, I don't know if the newer copies are more politically correct, but it did have the N word in it. And I just don't know. Whenever the N word or really politically incorrect books are out there, it really takes away from the story, and there's really no reason it needs to be in a book.
Thank you so much for watching my video. Hopefully you enjoyed what I had to say, and maybe you even added a book or two to your TBR list.